The restaurant had a quiet, rustic charm, the kind of place that prided itself on good food and an intimate atmosphere. It was a hidden gem, tucked away from the tourist-heavy streets, and most of its customers were locals or those who had stumbled upon it by accident. That night, one such customer sat alone in the corner, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, his weathered face partially hidden under the brim of a hat. He didn't ask for special treatment, didn't demand attention, just quietly ordered a steak and a glass of whiskey. The waitress, a young woman named Lisa, barely glanced at him as she scribbled down his order. Lisa had been working at the restaurant for only a few months, and while she was good at her job, she had a habit of letting her opinions fly without much of a filter. She was passionate about movies, always talking about the latest releases with customers and co-workers, but she had little patience for what she called washed-up actors who should just retire. As she returned to the bar to place the man's drink order, she struck up a conversation with another server. "You know who that guy in the corner looks like?" she said with a smirk. "Clint Eastwood, but like way older and kind of, I don't know, tired-looking." The bartender chuckled. "Maybe because it is Clint Eastwood." Lisa scoffed. "No way. Clint Eastwood is like a Hollywood legend. What would he be doing here?" The bartender gave her a knowing look. "You really don't know, do you?" Before she could press for an answer, the manager suddenly appeared, his face slightly pale as he whispered something to another employee. Lisa frowned, sensing something was off. A few moments later, the manager approached the table in the corner, speaking softly to the quiet man in the hat. The man just nodded, barely reacting. When Lisa went to drop off the steak, she still wasn't convinced. "So," she said casually, setting down the plate, "people are saying you're Clint Eastwood." The man looked up at her, his piercing eyes sharp and unreadable. "That a problem?" he asked in a voice that was unmistakably his. Lisa froze. For the first time, she really looked at him. The strong jaw, the familiar squint, the presence that somehow filled the whole room. Her stomach dropped. "Oh, no," she stammered. I didn't think." He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his whiskey before speaking. "Didn't think an old, washed-up actor like me would be here?" Lisa's heart nearly stopped. He had heard everything. Before she could apologize, the manager suddenly appeared at her side, his expression tight with panic. "Mr. Eastwood," he said hurriedly, "I am so sorry for any disrespect. Lisa is new here and—" Clint held up a hand, silencing him. Then, to Lisa's surprise, he chuckled. "Relax. I've been called worse." He turned his gaze back to her. "But you might want to know whose place you're working at before running your mouth." Lisa's breath caught. Whose place? It hit her like a freight train. The restaurant, the one she had been working at for months, was his. He owned it. Her face turned bright red. "Mr. Eastwood, I am so sorry. I had no idea." He waved off the apology, cutting into his steak with steady hands. "Lesson learned," he said simply. "Enjoy your night." Lisa backed away, mortified, as the other employees tried to contain their laughter. The story spread through the restaurant like wildfire, and by the time Clint finished his meal and left a generous tip, everyone knew she had insulted the owner without realizing it. As he walked out the door, he turned back just once, tipping his hat slightly. "Next time," he said with a smirk. "Watch what you say about the old guys." And with that, he was gone. Lisa stood frozen, still feeling the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. The restaurant was buzzing with hushed laughter and sideways glances in her direction. She groaned inwardly. Of all the people she could have insulted, it had to be Clint Eastwood, and in his own restaurant no less. Her manager shot her a look as he walked past. "Smooth move, Lisa," he muttered. She spent the rest of her shift keeping her head down, but every time she passed the bartender smirked at her. "So," he teased, "you gonna start researching restaurant owners before cracking jokes now?" "Shut up," she mumbled, focusing on wiping down a table. By the time her shift ended, she was sure she'd be fired. She lingered near the manager's office, debating whether she should just quit before he got the chance to let her go. But before she could make a decision, her manager stepped out, shaking his head with an amused sigh. "Don't worry, Lisa," he said. "You're not fired." She blinked. "I'm not?" He crossed his arms. "Mr. Eastwood specifically told me not to. Said you learned your lesson the hard way and that was punishment enough." Lisa exhaled in relief. But then the manager smirked. "He also said he expects better service next time, and maybe a little more respect for old washed-up actors." Lisa groaned, covering her face. "I'm never living this down, am I?" "Nope." The manager clapped her on the shoulder. "But look at it this way, you've got a story no one else does. Not many people can say they got roasted by Clint Eastwood and kept their job." Lisa managed a weak chuckle, still mortified but grateful she hadn't completely ruined everything. The next night she showed up to her shift determined to be on her best behavior. But when she walked into the restaurant, she found something sitting on the bar, left there just for her. A single DVD copy of Gran Torino, with a yellow sticky note attached. In sharp, unmistakable handwriting, it read, "Don't forget, some of us old guys still got it." Lisa shook her head, laughing despite herself. Lesson definitely learned. The sticky note and DVD became an instant conversation piece among the staff. Every time Lisa walked past the bar, someone made a crack about respecting the old guys or checking IMDb before running her mouth. She took it in stride. After all, it was better than being fired, but deep down she couldn't shake the lingering embarrassment. A week later, just as the teasing started dying down, Clint Eastwood walked back into the restaurant. Lisa nearly dropped the tray she was carrying when she saw him take his usual seat in the corner. The place went dead silent for a moment, everyone aware of what had happened last time. Then, as if nothing had ever happened, Clint removed his hat, glanced at the menu, and waited for someone to take his order. Lisa felt every eye in the restaurant on her. The bartender gave her a little nudge. "Go on," he whispered, grinning. "Your turn." With a deep breath, she grabbed her notepad and made her way over. "Good evening, Mr. Eastwood," she said carefully, keeping her voice professional. He looked up at her with the same unreadable gaze as before. A beat of silence passed, and then, just barely, she caught the twitch of amusement at the corner of his mouth. "Lisa, right?" he asked. She nodded. He leaned back slightly. "Still think I should retire?" Lisa felt the heat rise to her face again, but she refused to let herself panic this time. Instead, she smirked. "Well, sir, after watching Gran Torino, I'd say you've still got a few good years left in you." That made him chuckle, a low, quiet laugh that somehow made the room feel at ease. "Good answer," he said, tapping the table. "Now let's see if your service has improved as much as your attitude." Lisa grinned and pulled out her notepad. "What'll it be?" He ordered his usual steak and whiskey, and this time she made sure everything was perfect. She checked, in just the right amount, never hovering, never ignoring until his meal was done. When she returned to clear the table, he left something unexpected beside his tip. Another sticky note. This time it simply read, "Good job, kid. See you next time." Lisa smiled to herself as she tucked the note into her apron. She had learned her lesson the hard way, but in the end, she hadn't just kept her job. She had earned the respect of Clint Eastwood himself. And that was something worth a little embarrassment. Over the next few weeks, Clint Eastwood became something of a regular at the restaurant. He didn't come in every night, but when he did, he always took the same corner seat, ordered the same steak and whiskey, and, much to Lisa's relief, never brought up their initial awkward encounter again. The staff got used to his presence, treating him like any other customer, though there was always a subtle hum of excitement whenever he walked through the door. Lisa, for her part, made sure to be on her best behavior whenever she served him, and she even did some research on his films so she wouldn't embarrass herself again. One night after his usual quiet meal, Clint lingered at his table, sipping his whiskey as the dinner rush died down. The restaurant had settled into a comfortable rhythm, servers wiping down tables, the kitchen winding down for the night. Lisa was refilling salt shakers at a nearby table when Clint casually asked, "So Lisa, what do you really want to do?" She blinked, caught off guard. You mean besides waiting tables?" He smirked. "Yeah, that." She hesitated. She hadn't really talked to anyone about it, but since he was asking, "I've always wanted to be a writer," she admitted. "Screenwriting, actually. I took some classes in college, but you know, life happens, bills happen." She gestured vaguely at the restaurant. Clint nodded, considering her words. "You any good?" Lisa let out a nervous laugh. "I'd like to think so, but it's not exactly easy breaking into Hollywood, especially when you're serving steaks instead of networking." Clint didn't respond right away. He took another slow sip of his drink, then set the glass down. "Tell you what," he said. "Next time I come in, bring me something you've written. A script, a scene. Doesn't have to be long. Just something that shows me what you've got." Lisa's heart nearly stopped. "Wait, what?" "I'll read it," he said simply, as if he hadn't just turned her entire world upside down. Lisa stared at him, trying to process what was happening. Clint Eastwood, an actual Hollywood legend, was offering to read her writing. This had to be some kind of prank. "You're serious?" she asked, still half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha." He shrugged. "You don't have to, but if you want to, I'll take a look." Lisa barely managed to stammer out a response before he slid a $100 bill under his plate, tipped his hat, and walked out the door. The moment he was gone, she dropped into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. The bartender walked by and smirked. "So, you gonna write something, or just stand there looking like you got hit by a freight train?" Lisa grinned, already pulling out her phone to start jotting down ideas. One way or another, she wasn't going to waste this chance. The next few days were a blur of late-night writing sessions, coffee-fueled brainstorming, and second-guessing every word she typed. Lisa hadn't written anything serious in years. And now, suddenly, Clint freaking Eastwood was going to read her work? No pressure. She scrapped her first draft. Then the second. The third one had potential, but she convinced herself it was garbage, and started over. By the time Clint returned to the restaurant a week later, she had barely slept, but she had something, a 10-page scene from an original script. It was raw, but it was hers. As soon as he sat down, she walked up with her usual notepad, heart pounding in her chest. "Steak and whiskey?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Clint gave her a knowing smirk. "That, and whatever you've got for me." She swallowed hard, then pulled the neatly stapled pages from her apron and placed them on the table. He glanced at them briefly before tucking them into his jacket pocket. "I'll read it later," he said. Lisa nodded, though she had no idea how she was supposed to function for the rest of the night knowing Clint Eastwood had her script in his possession. The next time he returned, she was a wreck. Had he hated it? Was he going to tell her to stick to waiting tables? He sat down as usual, ordered his steak and whiskey, and, without looking up from the menu, said, "You've got talent." Lisa's breath caught. I do?" He nodded. "Dialogue's sharp. Characters feel real. A few rough edges, but nothing that can't be worked out." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just a polite compliment. He was actually giving her real, honest feedback. "Really?" she asked, still afraid she had misheard him. Clint chuckled. "Wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." He leaned back, studying her. "You serious about this writing?" Lisa nodded, her nerves settling into something firmer. "Yeah, I am." He took a slow sip of whiskey, then set the glass down. "Good. Keep at it." He slid a business card across the table. "Call that number. It's a friend of mine, a producer. I'm not promising anything, but tell him I sent you and he'll at least take a meeting." Lisa stared at the card like it was made of solid gold. Lisa clutched the business card like it was a winning lottery ticket. She read the name over and over. Frank Delaney, producer. Her heart pounded. This was real, but excitement quickly gave way to doubt. Would this guy even take her seriously? Sure, Clint Eastwood had told her she had talent, but What if this producer thought she was just some lucky waitress who had stumbled into a favor? She held onto the card for 3 days before she finally worked up the nerve to dial the number. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Delaney. Lisa swallowed hard. Hi, Mr. Delaney. My name's Lisa Carter. Clint Eastwood gave me your number. He said I should call you about a script I wrote. There was a pause, then a slight chuckle. Clint, huh? That guy's got an eye for talent. All right, kid. Tell me about your script. Lisa's nerves nearly paralyzed her, but she forced herself to push through. She gave him the elevator pitch, stumbling a little at first, but gaining confidence as she spoke. When she finished, Delaney hummed thoughtfully. Sounds interesting. Email me a copy and I'll take a look. Lisa nearly dropped her phone. Really? Yes, absolutely. I'll send it right away. Good, Delaney said. And if Clint's backing you, you might actually have something. Just make sure it's your best work. The line went dead. Lisa stared at her phone in disbelief. This was happening. That night she stayed up revising her script, double-checking. Every line, every scene, every detail. By morning she took a deep breath and hit send. Days passed. Every time her phone buzzed, her stomach twisted in anticipation. Then a week later, an email arrived. From Frank Delaney. Subject, your script. Lisa held her breath as she opened it. Lisa, I read your script. It's good, real good. Needs some polish, but you've got the chops. Let's set up a meeting and talk about where you want to take this. You free next week? Lisa let out a squeal loud enough that the bartender at work nearly dropped a tray. She had a meeting. A real meeting. As she stared at the email, heart racing, she knew this was it. The start of something bigger. All because one night she had insulted Clint Eastwood, and somehow he had turned it into the best mistake of her life. Lisa could hardly believe it. A week ago, she was just another waitress grinding through shifts. Now, she had a meeting with a real Hollywood producer. All because she had mouthed off to the wrong or maybe the right guy. She knew she had to be ready. She spent the next few days researching Frank Delaney, reading interviews, and even watching a few of the films he had produced. He had worked on some big projects, mostly gritty dramas, exactly the kind of stories she wanted to tell. The night before the meeting, Clint Eastwood came into the restaurant again. Lisa hadn't told anyone about Delaney's response yet. She was afraid of jinxing it, but as soon as she saw Clint settle into his usual seat, she knew she owed him an update. She walked over with a grin. Steak and whiskey? He smirked. You already know the answer. As she scribbled on her notepad, she hesitated for a moment, then looked at him. I sent the script to Delaney. Clint nodded, like he'd expected as much. And? Lisa's heart raced. He wants to meet. For the first time since she had met him, Clint's expression softened. Good, he said simply. You ready? She swallowed. I think so. I've been reading up on him, preparing answers to possible questions, making sure I know my script inside and out. Clint gave a small chuckle. That's all good. But remember, he's not just looking at your script. He's looking at you. He wants to know if you're someone worth investing in. Confidence matters just as much as talent. Lisa nodded, absorbing every word. As she turned to put in his order, Clint added, Oh, and one more thing, don't forget to enjoy it. She gave him a questioning look. He smirked. You only get your first Hollywood meeting once, kid. Might as well have fun with it. The next morning, Lisa stood outside Delaney's office in Los Angeles, nerves rattling inside her. She had borrowed a blazer from her roommate, made sure her script was neatly printed, and rehearsed answers to every possible question. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The meeting lasted an hour. Delaney was blunt but fair. He pointed out what worked in her script and what didn't. But most importantly, he saw potential. I like your voice, he said at the end. There's something there, keep refining it. Lisa left the office feeling like she was floating. He hadn't handed her a deal on the spot, but that didn't matter. She had a foot in the door. That night, when Clint came back to the restaurant, Lisa walked over and grinned. You were right. He raised an eyebrow. I usually am. She laughed. It wasn't just about the script, it was about me, and I think I held my own. Clint nodded, satisfied. Good. Now keep at it.